John Holmstrom is the founder of Punk Magazine and one of the greatest illustrators of all time.
And he did that little illustration there of CBGB right in the middle of it. Oh, cool.
John, I'm going to start with you. How did you know to make a magazine you called it Punk? How did you know what this was? Nobody else did.
I read an article in the Village Voice by James Wolkin, and it described the Ramones in a paragraph, and I knew I was going to love them. And then Lisa Robinson had done a story about the way they looked for Cream magazine. So there was an awareness about the CBGB scene if you were a rock and roll fan and went to every concert you could go to.
So out of the group of you here, I know John was at CBGB's. Did anybody else get a chance to go to the original CBGB's? And yay!
They did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now with that in mind, 50,000 bands, you've got extremely well artists. Now, how did you decide the seminal acts and songs to pick? Because I noticed that some of the songs in the timeline chronology, you opted more for the more famous ones than the initial songs that might have been performed. So how did you make all of those decisions?
Well, I mean, we wanted to tell the best story we could, and it was the story of Hilly, really. It's the story of how Hilly started this club. And so you have television, and you have some of the lesser-known groups that sort of started it, and even the Ramones were not known at the time. They just happened to become big. But it was about sort of telling the journey of the beginning of the club. So that rules out a whole bunch of, bands, Green Day and all the other bands later on. So that's what that's all about.
We do have peppered throughout a little bit of an homage to some of these bands that came later by putting them on the wall, even though it's, out of time, out of period, and, for some of the religious punkers, it throws them off. But it is a movie after all, and so we wanted to give a hint of what was to come, so we made some choices that were not chronologically accurate, but sometimes either the message of the song or the soul of the song was we felt what was right for that moment, and so we took a few leaps.
I mean, in the music, we don't just have the famous songs. There's a lot of really sort of obscure things on the soundtrack, and that we think that's fun. That'll be discoveries for people to discover. There's like 67 songs in the movie or something like that. So there's a lot of songs that nobody's ever heard of.
And there's some great discoveries we made in the process.
Yeah.
Like there's a Wayne County tune in the movie that was a discovery for all of us. I mean, it's a great tune. So it'll be great for audiences to find that, because I think it was pretty obscure before this movie.
Yeah.
Were there songs you wanted that you couldn't get because of licensing issues?
I mean, there's always some. There's some songs. I mean, we at one point we're going to have some more known Ramone songs, and we couldn't figure that out. But we have a lot of Joey. We have 2 Joey Ramone songs in there. It's his voice. It is the same sound, but it's his voice, and they're not known songs. And in terms of, there's a Patti Smith song that's like Because of Night, which was the Bruce Springsteen Patti Smith song that's from a little bit later time period. That we picked that because that song sort of is about the scene and about the concept of the movie. But it would have been great to have maybe another Patti Smith song from earlier. But it's always like a sort of give and take, and you have a limited budget. You have to decide what's important, what's not important. And hopefully, we made the right choice. I mean, that's what we try to do.
For the actors, can you talk a little bit about your characters and getting into them, and what surprised you, shocked you, made you adore them or hate them?
Am I starting?
Yeah.
Oh, good, okay. Well, I play Taxi. He's the sound guy in the club. And Taxi's actually a character that's written. He's a mixture of 4 different guys that were soundmen at the club. Charlie Martin, Norman Dunn, and Cosmo Holmes, and Taxi. And I spent a lot of time with Taxi. He wrote a lot of stories. He's a very good writer. And he taught me how to sound mix. If you asked me to sound mix today, I probably could not do it. But when I was playing the character, it was what was amazing was that everything that he told me about the character was, there's one thing that you have to portray, and that's the love of the music. And I didn't know a lot of the bands. I'm a Canadian kid, so I punk Green Day, right? Not television, Blondie, the Ramones. That's just not in my vocabulary. So I had to learn all of these different acts, and then seeing the way that, like Joel David Moore comes in and plays this role, Mickey Sumner coming in and playing this role, I had the best spot in the entire house. So I just absolutely got an education playing the role.
Yeah, I think that overall it was really tough to kind of find how to get into the mind space and the realm of where we were. I grew up knowing some of these bands. I was a skater kid, so skater kids liked punk. And in fact, the first shirt that I owned, band shirt that I owned, was a Ramones shirt because my parents were conservative and they wouldn't let any skulls and crossbones, and they're just the pictures of their faces. And so that was actually the first punk shirt that I owned, and the most rebellious I ever got as a child. But playing Joey was interesting because he had a mixture of different accents, and he was from Queens. He had a Jewish Queens accent off stage, and then on stage it was a faux Brit Queens Jewish accent that he would bring and developed into something else through time. So picking with Randy what we were going to go with and sort of what genre we were going to play Joey was fun and creative and difficult. And I think that really what we tried to do was just create the essence of the Ramones for people so that we weren't as much worried about what era, what exact time, what year we were in, what month we were in, and more what made sense for the overall, accessing the understanding of Ramones.
What surprised you about him?
Everything. Joey was a very awkward fellow, and he did not want the spotlight. He didn't start as the leader of the group. He started as a drummer, and they needed somebody to sing, and he couldn't drum and sing at the same time, and it was just a nightmare. And so they were always fighting, and they were never happy. And so they ended up throwing him up to the top, and he started singing. And then he never did anything else. He just sang. And he was a very interesting guy because he was sort of the spotlight of that band, but off of stage he didn't want anything to do with any version of the spotlight. So I think that probably we can kind of relate to that at some point, when we're kind of doing something as actors or producers or directors, and then when you're asked questions about what you do, you're like, I don't know. Yeah. I'm like here right now. This is fun. This is healthy.
I play a gentleman named Terry Ork, who was a band manager and music promoter, and is no longer with us, unfortunately. And despite the fact that Terry was not a recognizable celebrity, it's such a gift and a luxury to have a blueprint of a character that, as opposed to when we're playing a character who's purely fictional, and sometimes I'm sure you guys have been like me, where just weeks, I don't even know where to start with this guy. Christ, it's wonderful. I could look up a picture of Terry. Oh, he had a beard. Oh, he wore a scarf. And, it alleviates you of a lot of insecurities that you might have as an actor if your decisions are right or wrong. Nobody can argue that that's what Terry looked like, and it's wonderful. With that comes a responsibility that you want to pay this person homage, and I did track down some friends of Terry's and spoke with them, and I loved his passion and for these artists, and the support and generosity that he gave them, his kind of fun-loving nature and impishness. I'm nothing if not impish, so I thought I could really contribute to that. And then I think the whole thing, I'm a fan and follower of many of these performers. What I didn't know, first of all, I think I harbored the same misconception that a lot of people do about the club in general, which was just this very hostile, drug, spit, mosh pit kind of thing. And early on, I think in later years it became more hardcore, but initially, you're talking about Patti Smith's spoken word poetry and things of that nature. It's such a diverse group of artists that were very supportive of one another, it seemed. And so that there was a real endearing vein through the story of that touched me as someone who likes to support his fellow artists as well. That it was a very nurturing place, which is what surprised me.
And Johnny, did you have fun rocking the beard? And also, was it fun to go from the science world of Big Bang into this total rock star world?
Beard was no fun at all. It was about 105 degrees in Savannah.
I didn't recognize you that day. You showed
I
up
was
and
like,
sat
"This
down
is Johnny."
next to me. I said, "Hi, I'm Jody."
That's good.
Mine was beard.
And was it fun to be in the rock world instead of the science?
Well, absolutely. I mean, selfishly, just to be associated with something like CBGB, which is so synonymous with what's badass cool, is not something you just want to be a part of a paragraph in its history. And I really thought it was. I mean, like some of the younger actors who were in the band television played the fellas. You know, they had never heard of these guys before. 20 years ago, you couldn't have made, you know, now there's such a wealth of information and research that we could all go to and online and things of that nature where you guys could really, you did a fucking fantastic job in crawling into those performances. And it's
Well,
really
and it was interesting because sometimes Johnny and I think you got to hang out with Taxi, right? Yeah, they had to, you know, all of our guys have passed away. So, like there were times that your character had passed away as well, right? So there were certain people that were on set, and there were a lot of people that were involved in the CBGB world that helped us establish the parameters of where we were. I remember making some decisions early on, and Lisa had said, he wouldn't have done that, and we all kind of discussed like what to do with the smoking scenario, you know, like because everybody smoked back then, but nobody really knew Joey as a smoker, and so because he had quit pretty early on before the Ramones got big, so we kind of had to just made those decisions as we went. But just the wonderful world of CBGB is so interesting and unique, and something that was trying to bear a child of a certain genre of music that paired an entire other, you know, genre, and actually was the, you know, between collaborating between, you know, a lot of different artists was the born, you know, punk in and of its like roots, and I think that's pretty cool.
Speaking of Lisa, how involved were Hilly's children, if at all, with this project?
Lisa was very, very involved. Right from the very beginning, we talked to Lisa. I mean, we still talk to Lisa probably
Several times a day.
Several times a day. She came over to our house yesterday. She's out here for the.
She brought me these punk CBGB earrings.
Well, what happened was when we secured the rights to make the movie, you know, it was really with her, and we had to figure this out. And then Lisa sort of hooked us up with everybody. I think hooked us up with you, John, and various band members.
She made this big long list and said, this is everybody who worked there, everybody that hung around all the time, this is everybody that was born out of there, and I'm in touch with them all, so whoever you want to talk to. So we were like, well, we want to talk to everyone.
Yeah, it's like 100, we talked to more than 100 people.
Yeah.
You know, like, who are we talking to today? Oh, this is the doorman that was there for many years, or this was Taxi, or this was Cosmo.
Cheetah Chrome, which showed
Cheetah
up.
Chrome was on the set too. Cheetah was one of the dead boys. Rupert Grint plays Cheetah Chrome in the movie. So it was pretty amazing to have that wealth of knowledge and everything.
Talk about the casting, because the casting is, everyone seems like they were born for these roles.
Well, we had a great casting director. We worked with Rick Pagano and Cassidy Boyd, his assistant, quite a bit. But we were just really fortunate. You know, we've worked with Alan Rickman before, 2 other movies, Bottle Shock and Noble Son, and it was interesting because we cast him, and then we sort of started putting together the pieces, and the idea was we wanted to have sort of a mix of complete unknown people in some of the roles, like we do with Keen McRae, who plays Sting, for example. He was he open casting call guy, you know, it's amazing.
Kid from Alabama.
Yeah,
I thought he was British the first time I met him.
Yeah, well, he said,
told him don't.
we told him because Alan's actually friends with Sting in real life, and he came in and he did an amazing accent. He said he was from Birmingham, Alabama, and we said, no, you're from Birmingham, England. Never going to say you're not from Birmingham, England.
So just keep that accent.
So just keep that. So he kept that until he finished shooting, and then he asked us, and we said, yeah, you can tell Alan now where you're from. So because we know Alan. So anyway,
we saw so many people for that role. You know, it's not a big role, but you just had to find some. I mean, Keen is actually a wonderful musician and singer.
So,
So,
but
he
it-
really knew his way
So
around.
we sort of looked around and we had pictures and we matched people and we figured out who could be this person, and we were just really fortunate it all really worked out. I think the CBGB, the name, what it stood for, the club, it also really attracted people. Like Johnny said, it was a sort of an interesting thing for him to go do, and Joel.
And most of the crew were like really serious music fans, if not punk fans. And so the extras casting person, Abba, she took it so seriously. She had pictures of, even non-speaking roles. The extras were
Band
cast.
members.
She would have people come in and they would have to be able to play because they couldn't fake it if they couldn't really play. And then we pick from a series of people, but even the extras look a lot alike. That was really hard work on her part.
John, you knew Hilly. How does the movie stand up?
I think it's a very accurate reflection of what the club was like. I think Alan Rickman does a great job as Hilly, and he's like the glue that holds that thing together. And I think they did a great job, Randy and Jody, of choosing Hilly as a way to tell the story of what happened at CBGB's back then. At first, when I heard about it, I'm like, Hilly? Who wants to see a movie about Hilly? But he's like the straight man, right?
Yeah.
And everybody else is the crazy person.
Yeah.
And what I really love is they made it a comedy. They made it a funny film. So many rock and roll movies are so deadly serious and boring. And then when I saw this was going to be funny, I couldn't wait to get on board.
Well, he appears to be such a character in the movie. Was he a character in real life?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They all were. Merv, Merv was everybody's favorite person at CBGB's. He was the good guy.
And did
Really
he have an
great
English
guy.
accent? I mean, that's what he's sort of a fake English accent that he sort of put on.
He had like a mild Scottish accent, I think.
And nobody was really sure, if he put that on or whether he was, from there. He always wore a hard
spent
hat.
a bit of time there, but we don't know if it was weeks, months, or days. I
A
don't think it was
flyover.
years.
Yeah, he wore a hard hat all the time, and
Scott
nobody really
Farrell.
knew why. I mean, we asked so many people, they're like, no, he just liked to wear a hard hat, That's
In the
right?
club.
Well, I think he was really like the bouncer.
Yeah.
And it really was a Hell's Angels bar when it started. That's in the film. But it's
Yeah.
not the Angels, but it was a biker place. Like, I was afraid to go to CBGB's at first because I was afraid of the Hell's Angels. And I remember being there when they did like have a big bar fight in the back by the pool table.
I don't think that was an unreasonable fear.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you were like a long-haired hippie guy, right?
Mhm.
And these bikers didn't really necessarily get along with those guys, right? So,
Right.
Yeah.
The place was definitely, and you represent this, a community for kids from Long Island, Connecticut, Jersey, all over the world, or all over the country, to come and really kind of learn about this type of music and really be a part of an atmosphere. And I guess my question for everybody, if you can answer it, is do you think the internet is killing stuff like this? Do you think places like this have a future or still exist? From the Whiskey a Go-Go, I guess.
I think actually that's an interesting question. I think the internet is CBGB for these people now.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know that there's ever going to be another place like this, but with the origins of a genre of music. But I think like these little sites that you can go to,
Yeah.
and it was MySpace at one time. Now it's something else. It may be MySpace again, depending on how good Justin does with it.
But it has sort of a, the mark, the CBGB mark, and the sort of nostalgia and the mystique of it. People talk about it in that way because I've had those questions from people in Brazil. Say the same thing. Like, do you think there'll be another place like that? And I do think that there's something about the internet, the sort of, it's like everybody can put their music up there. People can put their videos up there. I mean, there are lots of artists that just get discovered because people discover them on the internet. And that didn't happen back then. You had to perform at CBGB, and you had to hope that, some manager, producer guy would come in and see you, and then you get to the next step. Nowadays, it can happen overnight. It does with these like TV shows and these internet things. So I mean, there's something interesting about that. It's a little different than it was.
Do you feel like there's a musical equivalent today, or that's even possible now?
I mean, a musical movie, you mean, or a musical?
No, just a musical movement to sort of originate from that sort of grassroots?
It feels like there are a lot of people who are sort of reacting to the fact that you don't need necessarily a record company or a big label, that you can create your own music. You know, I mean, you know, it's interesting because Taylor Hawkins is in the movie playing Iggy, right? And they recorded. They're one of the biggest bands in the world, and they recorded one of the albums in a garage.
The Foos, yeah.
You know, the Foo Fighters, just so that they could sort of show like you don't need all this stuff. You know, and I think that's really what CBGB was. There wasn't a lot of producing going on there. They would just practice and they would do it. And John will even tell you these guys would come in, they weren't that good. They'd work for a few weeks, they'd get better and better and better. And that was like their sort of incubation period, you know?
I think it's secular too, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
In that, you know, something strikes a chord in pop culture, be it a fashion of music, a fashion of fashion, and then it kind of snowballs and becomes very bloated. And I think if you look at the bands at the time that were the top bands, I think like Journey, for example, doing these massive stadium tours with lasers and smoke and swinging, you know, and when that happens, someone inevitably, I think, then breaks it down, trims the fat off, boils it down to the purest expression of what that expression is of art, and that's what they shared in at that time in those hallowed walls. But I do think I think Jack White is a pretty good example of kind of spearheading, getting down to the basics of currently. I think he's a great example of that. Personally, I'm also a fan.
Now you had access to some of the original accoutrement of CBGB that the family had in storage.
Yes.
How important was that in your production design and for the actors to be immersed in the actual history?
Yes. What was that? Anyways. Okay. So
camera time.
Interestingly, when we made our deal to do the movie with Lisa, there was another group that was backing it, buying the mark, and to do this festival, this CBGB festival, and eventually maybe do a club. But when they tore down the club, and I don't know, maybe Hilly just knew this or something. They tore everything out of the club: the bar, the front doors, pieces of the wall, the urinals, all kinds of stuff. And it was in this shipping container in Williamsburg in Brooklyn. And we shot the movie in Georgia and New York. We went to New York at the end to get all the ins and outs and everything. But so we had the shipping container shipped to us, put on a truck, shipped to us, and we had the bar, we had the front doors. The front doors were, instead of the hydraulics that doors have, it had bungee cords, but we had those actual bungee cords. So there's something weird about that, like when he comes in the door and he pushes the door, and it's the real door that his character probably went through. There's something intrinsic, or I don't know what that is. And it helps the crew, it helps everybody,
Yeah, I remember when the stuff arrived, the crew was so excited, and then they opened the box of the toilets, and no one had cleaned those toilets for the day.
So they were like people with
gloves,
like putting these, but we had them in the set. We wanted to have all this real stuff, cash register, his desk. Alan sits down at the desk and he's doing the scene with Ashley, and he opens a drawer and he stops for a second and he pulls out this deli menu, which was like scribbled on. It's like, I'll have the matzo ball soup and the pastrami, and this was his desk. It's kind of cool.
Phone list in there too?
Yeah, his phone list. He had
Rolodex.
There were phone numbers that were like Lisa's phone number. Her actual phone number was like on the desk, which is it does something. I think it adds authenticity to it.
I felt that. I mean, not to get too metaphysical or anything, but I really felt like somehow it's kind of supported by the ghosts in that wood of the bar and those walls. It made it feel very authentic.
Yeah, which is what you hope for, And then when you're on a soundstage, it's always sort of weirdly foreign anyways, because you take off a wall to shoot this angle, and you put the wall back on, you take off the other wall, shoot this angle. So like, for an actor, I mean, that's strange. Like, what am I looking at now? And so we thought that it would really add, some authenticity to it.
Was that real dog food?
That was not. That was
never. No.
And in the original cut, there was more dog poop, but my wife, my partner said, "You gotta take it out." No, it was like brownie mix.
Oh.
The gagging of the crew was.
It was. The prop guy shows up with a platter, and it's like, "Would you want them more chunky?"
You asked.
Yeah.
That's it.
You asked the wrong person.
You're the one that had to step in it.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna lie, when we did the close-up on the feet, I was gagging. Yeah.
For Jody, your character Terry Ork was a gay man. Did you find in researching, like, obviously you would think punk would have sort of a very accepting and tolerant ethos, but did you find if that was indeed his experience?
Wow. You know, if I had a good answer for that, I don't know if it would be appropriate to share, honestly, because we are talking about someone who lived and had relationships. And I didn't really put too much thought in. It wasn't really necessary for the story to consider his sexuality.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. And also, since I do write for a gay magazine, any comments on what Sarah Gilbert recently said?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, she's a dear friend of mine. I love her very much, but that's for her to say. I'm just trying to be. I don't mean to be enigmatic or difficult. I'm just. I want to be respectful to people's private lives. I'm sorry. Oh, wonderful. I mean, I'm sure you guys had the similar experience. He's just a very, very generous actor, and he has a real presence, you know, in reality that also translates obviously onto film. I mean, he can hold a pause in a way that's very unique and yet magnetic at the same time. Few people can do that.
Experience?
The bravest?
Rebellious.
Rebellious. Oh, I don't know.
He wore a T-shirt.
Of all the, well, this is dressed up for me, so I don't know. But rebellious, I don't know. I mean, the most rebellious in our personal filmmaking experience is that when we decided to make independent films, we used to make studio films. When we started to make independent films, the first independent film we did was a movie called Marilyn Hotchkiss, Ballroom Dancing and Charm School, and we took the money out of our house. We put the mortgage of our house into the movie, and that was the initial funding for that movie. And that was probably the most rebellious, crazy thing that we've ever done.
But we just wanted to make,
Yeah,
we wanted
we
to
had two
tell
little
stories
kids.
that we cared about. We were getting up there in age, and we thought,
Getting up there, what do you know?
well, we were. I mean, you know, we weren't 20 anymore, and we just thought, you know, if we don't do it now, we're never going to do it. So, you know, we figured there would always be other options that didn't involve much money for us in life, and so we
That was pretty
started
crazy.
making independent films.
Yeah. Oh.
I think, without getting going into specifics, I think that there's a lot of rebellious decisions you have to make to kind of do anything that we're doing. More on just the dumb and crazy, why are we taking this time and sacrificing a lot? But once when it pays off and this is actually a great example of a movie that we get to kind of shed things that we do, being a very notable person on television and jump into a role and climb into clothes and get into wigs and a character and actually just kind of live in outside of Los Angeles and it did help that it was shooting outside of LA as well, because you're not even going home to your home. You're not getting into your own bed. You are living in somebody else's world for a little bit, and there's something really beautiful and creative and fun and brave and rebellious about those things.
That's true. That's true.
Very poetic.
For Randy and Jody,
Yeah.
one thing that impressed me in film that too many movies about the music business, rock and roll especially, women are the girlfriends or the groupies, but in this, women were professionals, musicians, producers,
Yeah.
journalists, and I take it you found that was true to what the scene actually was at the time?
Well, there were mostly guys there.
But
that,
there were
some women. Yeah, I mean, Gaynor Raven was a good friend of Hilly's,
And Hilly loved women and trusted women probably more than men. And
Right.
Hilly was a complicated guy to befriend because I think Alan plays him accurately. He was somewhat unapproachable. He could be gruff. He had a huge heart, and he really just wanted art to live. I mean, he was simple in some ways, but he wasn't so easy to be friends with if you were a guy. He was much easier to be friends with if you were a female. So even though the club filled with I don't even know if it was mostly men, but with a large majority of men at night, it's, you know, Tish and Snooki from Manic Panic, they're, I don't know if you heard of Manic Panic did the wigs, and they really made that kind of New York punk look. He was very good friends with them, and he was very good friends with Roberta Bailey, who manned the door. And it was, you know, his own daughter and Susanna Ryan, who really, you know, Lisa's a combination of both of those characters, who came in and said, Hilly, this place is going to shut down if you don't start paying the bills and get them out of Budweiser boxes and organize them. And I think only women, Merv was his friend, but only women could come in and redirect him. So the women were really important.
Thank you.